Hey guys, tonight we float gently through the cool dusk mist of ancient Lake Texcoco. The water glows silver under the fading sun, and around you, gently bobbing, are little rectangles of earth seemingly adrift. But they're not drifting. They're chinampas, the legendary floating gardens of the Aztecs, laced together like an earthy quilt upon the water. Ducks paddle past your canoe without a care in the world. A farmer rows by, humming something that sounds suspiciously like a lullaby for corn. This isn't your average backyard garden. These are literal floating farms, built to feed one of the largest cities of the ancient world. You can almost smell the mix of damp soil and blooming marigolds in the air. It's stunning. It's efficient. It's gently swaying. But let's be honest, you probably wouldn't last 5 minutes without accidentally tipping your canoe and falling face first into a basket of soggy amaranth greens. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Let me know in the comments where you're listening from and what time it is. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You're drifting now, the wooden paddle lazily slicing through shallow canal water as you pass rows and rows of chinampas, each one greener and more precisely laid out than the last. It's late, just past sundown, and the entire valley seems to exhale. Faint scents of maize, beans, and the perfume of social flowers hang in the warm evening air. Someone nearby is roasting something, and you imagine it's tamales packed with squash and steamed over river stones. The great city of Tenochtitlan sits in the distance like a mirage of stone and light. It's still bustling, even as twilight falls, but here, among the gardens, it's a symphony of crickets and breeze. You can hear the water lapping gently against the roots of trees that were, quite literally, planted to anchor islands. Willow branches droop toward the lake, brushing against your shoulders as you float past. These gardens weren't an afterthought or some pastoral hobby for retired priests. They were engineered masterpieces. Chinampas date back to at least the 12th century and became essential as the Aztec population exploded in the Valley of Mexico. Historians agree that these floating plots helped feed over 200,000 people in the capital city, but they still argue whether chinampas were the reason the empire could grow that large in the first place or just a clever response to expansion. Classic chicken and egg scenario, only the chickens floating. Each garden is an island made of lakebed mud, woven reed mats, and layers of aquatic vegetation, reinforced by the roots of ahujot, a type of willow tree that sounds like it's trying to sneeze. Over time, these rectangular islands became so dense and rooted that they looked like land, even though they're technically man-made islands barely above water level. You steer toward one plot lined with little furrows, just wide enough for a farmer to crouch in a canoe and tend their crop without ever stepping foot on land. That's right, many Aztec farmers spent entire workdays on water, farming from boats. Imagine managing your to-do list on a paddleboard. And you thought your standing desk was inconvenient. A fringe theory still floats, pun intended, that early chinampa farmers believed water spirits would curse you if you let your feet touch the lakebed before sunrise. Sounds oddly superstitious, but let's be honest, if you saw what lived in those reed thickets, you'd keep your sandals dry too. There's a rhythm to everything here. Every garden, every canal, every tree-lined border is placed with intention. And you feel that rhythm tonight, as you coast between rows of maize stalks swaying like dancers in the wind. The lake becomes a mirror, and the stars start pricking the surface. From time to time, you hear a low whistle. It's not the wind. It's a farmer in another canoe calling to his son. The boy replies with a soft hum, a kind of tonal code used to communicate across the dense garden grid. No walkie-talkies here, just well-practiced humming and the occasional frog who chimes in uninvited. There's a niche detail historians love to drop. The Aztecs reportedly measured garden productivity not by yield per acre, but by how many canoe loads they could haul each week. Talk about floating supply chains. A single farmer might ferry dozens of bundles of lettuce, chilies, or flowers before sunrise, sometimes with a chicken or two tied in the front like passengers on a watery Uber ride. And then, the moon appears, full and low, casting long ripples of silver across the canals. This is when the real magic happens. Some claim that chinampa farming was best done by night. Less heat, fewer bugs, more time to whisper to your plants. You laugh, but remember, this was an empire that worshipped maize as a literal god. If your corn needed a pep talk, you gave it one. One last paddle stroke and you arrive beside a platform built into one chinampa's edge. It's just big enough for a clay lantern and a sleeping mat, because yes, some farmers didn't bother going home. They curled up here, surrounded by the gentle creaking of growing things and the comforting slosh of water below. It's quiet now. Just you, the stars, and the floating garden below. Your hands trail in the water, where soft tendrils of aquatic plants brush against your skin like silk. You exhale, slowly. This is how the Aztecs built paradise, one scoop of mud at a time. You wake, gently, at the edge of dawn. The mist still clings low over the canals like a shawl tossed over the valley. Your fingers are pruny from last night's water trailing, and a dragonfly lands on your thumb as if to say good morning. The chinampa beneath your mat hasn't floated away in the night, which is honestly a small miracle. The farmer next to you, who you're pretty sure snored through at least 2 thunderstorms, stretches, yawns, and immediately starts checking his seedlings. Aztec mornings aren't rushed. They're ritual. First comes the offering, a pinch of maize meal tossed into the canal to appease the water gods. Or maybe it's just tradition. Historians still argue whether these dawn offerings were religious rites or polite ecological gestures. Either way, the fish seem to enjoy it. You sit up slowly and let your feet dangle over the edge of the garden. The water is cold, like wake-up call cold. Across the misty channels, figures are starting to appear, silhouettes of farmers pushing long poles through the shallows to steer their canoes. It's like a ballet of boats out there, quiet and coordinated. The chinampa under you smells of wet earth and living roots. You can almost hear the soil breathing. Rows of crops, beans, chilies, amaranth, squash, are tucked into perfectly combed ridges, their leaves still curled from the cool. There's something deeply satisfying about the symmetry. These aren't slapdash farms. They're waterborne spreadsheets. You take a slow walk down one garden row, careful not to step on any struggling seedlings. To your left, there's a row of sempasicil, the brilliant orange marigolds you now associate with Day of the Dead altars. But here, they're not for spirits. They're companion plants. The Aztecs were low-key genius when it came to agricultural multitasking. Marigolds repelled pests and added nutrients to the soil, all while looking fabulous. One quirky practice you spot further down the row, a floating gourd tied to a stick, bobbing like a tiny buoy. It's not decoration. It's a scare amphibian, used to frighten off frogs from eating delicate seedlings. Whether it actually worked is up for debate, but the frogs do seem wary. Probably just confused. There's a small thatched shelter in the corner of the chinampa, barely big enough to crouch in. Inside, you find a basket of tools, mostly wooden digging sticks and obsidian-edged blades. No steel. No tractors. Just patient, practiced hands. And it worked. According to some colonial records, chinampas were up to 7 times more productive than dryland fields. That's like turning your backyard garden into a Costco. You notice how the canals themselves aren't just transportation lanes. They're irrigation channels, fish farms, compost conveyors, and possibly the oldest aquatic gossip highways in Mesoamerica. Eavesdropping is easy when the water carries every whisper. A farmer glides past you with a load of mud balanced in a flat-bottomed canoe. He's restoring the soil, which sinks over time and needs regular replenishing. It's a bit like fluffing a pillow, only messier. He uses a long-handled rake to scoop up lakebed silt, rich in nutrients, and deposits it carefully between rows of beans. It's part of what made chinampa farming sustainable for centuries. Not flashy, but wildly effective. And then you hear it, a low chant, rhythmic and calming. Somewhere nearby, someone singing to their crops. Not metaphorically. Like, full-on lullaby. It's a practice that makes historians tilt their heads. Was it spiritual? Scientific? Were the plants into it? No one knows for sure. But you sit still and listen, and honestly, the corn seems to be swaying along. You spot a cluster of young boys hopping from one chinampa to another like frogs. One carries a basket of axolotls, those weirdly cute amphibians with permanent smiles. In Aztec times, these creatures weren't just adorable. They were a food source and a symbol of transformation. They also had medicinal uses, though let's be real, no one's totally sure how you get from salamander to healing salve without a few questionable experiments. As the morning warms, so does the air. The mist begins to lift, revealing more of the sprawling lake and garden tapestry. From above, Tenochtitlan's network of chinampas must have looked like green veins branching out from the heart of the city. You imagine birds eyeing the canals from above, watching humans in boats the way we now watch ants navigating a picnic. You float toward the edge of a particularly old chinampa where the trees are thicker. Here, a few carved stones lie half-submerged. They were once boundary markers, etched with symbols that defined who owned what. Historians still debate whether these plots were passed down through families or redistributed regularly by state officials. Either way, property disputes in a floating garden seem buoyantly civil. On one plot, you notice something odd, a patch of nothing. Just lake water. No plants. No mud. A ghost chinampa. Local legend says that some gardens were allowed to die when their keepers passed away without heirs, like letting an island return to the lake. Other versions say these were cursed plots, which is a lot of pressure for a zucchini bed. The sun's a little higher now, casting sharper shadows across the water. A few more canoes glide by, loaded with harvest, pale squashes, bundles of fragrant herbs, even long sugarcane stalks lashed together like tiny bamboo rafts. You begin to appreciate the precision of it all. Nothing wasted. Nothing rushed. Still, you wonder how they managed pests, weeds, or the occasional flood. Turns out, they had all sorts of hacks, like planting sacrificial crops to lure insects away, or releasing fish into canals to eat mosquito larvae. It's like an Aztec version of natural pest control, minus the expensive branding. You stretch your arms and lean back, feeling the chinampa shift ever so slightly beneath you. The lake is quieter now. Even the birds seem to pause mid-chirp. Maybe it's the rhythm of water and soil, or maybe it's the accumulated calm of centuries of midnight farming, but you could stay here forever. Or at least until lunch. And yes, there will be lunch. But first, more floating. More whispering plants. More marigolds winking at you from the shadows. The light thickens. No, really. It's not just brighter now, it's weightier, honeyed, pouring into the canals like syrup. Everything it touches gets a golden glaze. The water gleams like a mirror that's trying to nap. And you're gliding, slowly, silently, in a flat canoe so wide you're beginning to suspect someone tried turning a dining table into a boat. The canoe ride is both purposeful and lazy, a combination only the Aztecs seemed to master. You're headed toward a larger chinampa complex near the edges of Tenochtitlan's main market routes. It's here that the real magic happens. Crop rotation, seed propagation, soil experiments so intricate they'd make your high school biology teacher cry with joy. To your left, a man squats beside a small clay pot sunken into the soil. It's part of a moisture retention technique, Allah's unglazed pottery jars buried up to their necks. Water inside slowly seeps into the soil, hydrating plants from the roots. Sustainable, silent, and sneakily brilliant. Historians still argue whether this practice was widespread among chinampa farmers or reserved for drier inland regions, but even if it was rare here, it fits the vibe. You know, casually outsmarting nature. And speaking of casually smart, the planting patterns here are not random. At all. The beans are curling up maize stalks like polite climbers asking for support. Squash spreads its broad leaves over the soil to shade out weeds. This is the Aztec version of companion planting, what some now call the Three Sisters method. Corn, beans, and squash forming a kind of edible team. A team you could make soup out of. You lean over the side of the canoe to splash your fingers in the canal. The water is surprisingly clear. Small fish dart around, and every so often you spot a ripple that might be a turtle or a mythical lake spirit. Hard to tell. Local belief held that lakes had guardians, and while that may sound like bedtime story fluff, plenty of farmers made offerings just in case. You don't want to offend a lake spirit before planting season. Not unless you enjoy mysteriously limp tomatoes. The canoe driver, an elderly man with the sunniest crow's feet you've ever seen, hums softly. He navigates with a long pole, gently pushing off submerged roots and shoals. His hands are weathered, but his movements are so precise they feel like choreography. You ask if he's been farming long. He grins and says his family's had the same patch of chinampa for 13 generations. Then he pauses and corrects himself. At least. The records get fuzzy after that. You dock beside a platform shaded by woven reeds. A few children are pulling weeds by hand. Small ones, no gloves, laughing like it's a game. You kneel beside them and help. The weeds come up easily in this spongy, rich soil. One of the kids, probably 7 at most, holds up a worm like it's treasure. "Lucky garden," he says. And you believe him. Worms mean healthy earth. Even the kids know that. To one side, you notice a cluster of strange-looking plants, bulbous, with thick leaves and odd colors. They're test crops. Experimental. The Aztecs were not content to grow what everyone else grew. They tested hybrids, tracked which seeds grew faster, noted when pests struck. One fringe theory even suggests Chinampa keepers might have had primitive lab books, bundles of bark paper with hand-drawn glyphs tracking rainfall and moon phases. Historians still argue whether these were scientific logs or poetic metaphors. Either way, you want one. A woman calls out from a shaded hut, offering you a bowl of something steaming. It's a thick porridge made from amaranth, flavored with honey and chili. You eat it slowly, and while it's simple, it tastes like the food version of a lullaby. Amaranth, you learn, was sacred, not just a staple crop but an offering to gods, especially during festivals where it was shaped into edible sculptures. Yes, food art. Martha Stewart has nothing on these people. As you finish your meal, a light drizzle begins to fall, barely more than a mist. No one seems concerned. Rain is part of the rhythm. A few farmers even roll their eyes and mutter about Tlaloc, the rain god, having a flair for timing. According to one old legend, he gets jealous if another god gets more attention and schedules inconvenient showers out of spite. A petty weather deity. Classic. Rain also helps the planting process. Chinampa soil loves moisture, and the rain softens the top layer just enough to push new seeds in without tools. You join a planting row, poking tiny holes and dropping in maize kernels, one by one. It's repetitive, quiet, and strangely soothing. Like an ancient fidget toy. Further down the row, you pass a woman muttering to her plants again. Another lullaby. Maybe. Or maybe just complaining about the rain. Historians still debate whether these chants had agricultural impact or were purely personal rituals. Either way, you notice the corn near her feet looks a bit taller. Coincidence? Perhaps. But maybe talk really is cheap fertilizer. A hawk cries overhead, and everyone stops briefly to watch. It circles high above the lake, a speck of freedom in a sky thick with stories. Some say hawks are messengers. Others say they're just hungry. You decide both can be true. The day stretches slowly now, every motion deliberate. Chinampa life isn't rushed. The soil demands patience. The water encourages calm. And somewhere between sowing seeds and scooping mud, you realize the floating gardens aren't just about farming. They're about balance. Between land and water. Between effort and rest. Between humans and whatever ancient forces still nap beneath the reeds. And you? You are part of it now. Floating along, seed in hand, wondering whether that next row of squash will grow faster if you hum to it in a slightly dramatic whisper. Worth a shot. The light shifts again, like someone turned the sun's dial just a notch softer. Afternoon has arrived, and with it, a kind of drowsy hush that drapes itself over the floating gardens like a blanket. Even the birds seem to chirp in a slower tempo now, as if they too are on a siesta schedule. You're leaning against a reed fence, your fingers crusted with soil, your knees pleasantly sore. There's that feeling of good tired, the kind where you earned it, not from screens or meetings, but from touching the earth and whispering to tomatoes. Beside you, a woman in her 40s shows you a box, wooden, carved, and stained dark with time. Inside are small clay tokens shaped like maize kernels, raindrops, and oddly, frogs. Planting charms, she says with a wink. People tuck them into the soil for luck. Historians still argue whether this practice was purely spiritual or if there was some psychological placebo effect at work. Either way, you bury one of the frog charms beneath a patch of squash and immediately feel like a magical agricultural intern. You take a walk along one of the Chinampa's reed walkways. These aren't bridges in a usual sense, more like balance beams with the occasional helpful log nailed across. You wobble once or twice, but then your feet find the rhythm. Left, right, sway. You imagine Aztec children racing down these same paths, chasing each other with mud-splattered feet and lily crowns. You reach a small shrine built at the Chinampa's edge, half covered in moss, with obsidian shards poking from the soil around it like forgotten teeth. It's dedicated to Xilanen, the goddess of young maize. A woven offering sits at the base, green corn husks folded like origami, topped with marigold petals. You wonder if anyone still believes, or if this is just cultural muscle memory. Then again, believing doesn't always need a reason. A frog croaks from nearby, startling you just enough to laugh. You remember the charm you buried earlier and glance at the squash patch. Still squash. No miracle vines yet. But hey, patience is part of the gig. Further inland, you visit one of the more ambitious chinampa clusters, the ones with multilevel garden beds, each ringed by layers of packed reeds and anchored by trees. These trees, mostly ahujotes, do the heavy lifting. Their roots stabilize the chinampa, drink up excess water, and act as windbreakers when storms sweep across the lake. You press your palm against one and feel its bark, rough and furrowed like the hand of an old farmer. This isn't just a tree, it's infrastructure. Here, a group of young men are spreading silt onto the garden beds using flat wooden paddles. The silt, harvested from the canal bottoms, is rich with nutrients and perfect for refreshing the soil between planting cycles. The act looks simple but requires serious core strength. You try it once, wobble impressively, and end up with a stripe of black mud across your shins that will likely never come off. One of the guys claps your shoulder and says something that definitely includes the Nahuatl word for wobbly. You laugh and accept your fate as a temporary chinampa rookie. You sit with them for a while and listen to stories between their work chants. One man swears he saw a giant salamander once, bigger than a canoe, gliding under the water like a ghost. Another describes an ancestor who farmed by moonlight and never spoke a word to humans, only to his plants. Some say he vanished during an eclipse and became part of the lake. Historians still argue whether these stories stem from metaphor, hallucination, or family members who really hated parties. But under this hazy sky, they sound perfectly reasonable. As the sun begins to lower, casting long shadows through the latticework of corn stalks and bean vines, you're invited to help harvest a small patch of chiles. You've never harvested chiles before, and frankly, you're intimidated. These little guys look spicy just sitting there. But your guide, a wiry woman with an infectious laugh, shows you how to pinch the stem gently, twist, and drop each chili into a woven basket. You get the hang of it, though you also manage to rub your eye afterward and spend the next 10 minutes blinking dramatically. Once the chiles are collected, they're laid out on reed mats to dry. In the low light, the reds and oranges look like tiny flames scattered across the mat. It's beautiful. Also a little threatening. Chiles don't mess around. Nearby, someone prepares a drink, cacao, but not sweet like hot chocolate. This one is spiced with ground chili and whisked until it foams. You're handed a cup and take a cautious sip. It's like drinking a storm cloud. Bitter, smoky, slightly fiery, and oddly perfect after a day on the gardens. You sit beside a slow-burning fire now, the embers crackling softly. Someone starts playing a simple melody on a clay flute, the notes curling into the air like incense. A few children drift off with heads in their parents' laps. One man mumbles a story about how maize used to be hidden inside a mountain, and it took a clever ant to dig it out. You close your eyes and picture it, an ant with attitude and an appetite for carbs. The last light of day settles over the water, and the chinampas begin to glow. Not literally, though you wouldn't be surprised at this point, but with a kind of lingering warmth. You realize that nothing here is wasted. Not water, not sunlight, not even the weeds. Everything has a place. Everything is part of a loop. And you're beginning to feel like part of it too. A humble little helper on this floating world of soil and songs and chili-scented dreams. The stars begin to blink open above you, like someone dimmed the whole sky and forgot to warn the constellations. Night is settling in, but the chinampas are far from asleep. This is when the gardens shift into a softer gear. Not less alive, just quieter. More secretive. As if the crops are whispering to each other when no one's watching. You're guided by lantern light now, flickering bowls of oil perched on wooden poles or flat-bottomed dishes floating calmly on the canal, like sleepy jellyfish. The oil is coconut-based, thick and golden, giving off a nutty, warming scent that clings to your clothes like a good memory. You walk carefully, listening to your own footsteps squish against the mud path, each step a squelch and a sigh. A young boy runs past carrying a bundle of reeds and a small net. You follow out of curiosity and find a group preparing for the evening harvest. Not crops this time, but insects. Specifically, a wattle, the eggs of waterflies laid in the shallows of the lake. Known as Mexican caviar, these tiny eggs were considered a delicacy by the Aztecs. Rich in protein and delightfully crunchy when cooked, they were collected on thin reeds set into the water like tiny landing pads. The group teaches you how to lift the reeds gently, like coaxing a shy secret from the lake's surface. The eggs shimmer like silver dust. You help collect a few, and they let you taste one raw, salty, earthy, with a vague snap of biting into a tiny secret. Historians still argue whether a wattle was a common food or reserved mainly for religious rituals and nobility, but in this moment, under a moonlit sky, it feels like something precious. Afterward, you're invited to sit by a hearth where a family prepares tamales stuffed with beans, greens, and the tiniest drizzle of chili sauce. The masa is warm, pillowy, and absurdly comforting. You could eat 20. You probably shouldn't. You try to pace yourself and fail utterly by tamale number 4. No regrets. Nearby, an elder begins to hum, a deep, chest-vibrating tone that doesn't quite become a song, more like a lullaby made of vowels. A slow clap begins to accompany him, and a girl dances in a small circle, her feet brushing the packed soil like wind across a rug. You learn this is a midnight offering dance, meant to honor Tlaloc, the rain god. She doesn't look older than 10, but her feet know a language you don't. You sit back and sip more cacao, this time without the chili. You're learning. Someone hands you a rattle made of dried gourds. You're not entirely sure what to do with it, but you shake it gently with the rhythm, and no one objects. You are now part of the garden orchestra. As the night deepens, you wander toward the center of the chinampa where older farmers are gathered around a bowl of maize. One by one, they select kernels and press them into the soil of a raised mound, speaking soft blessings over each one. It's not planting season, this is ceremonial. They're sowing dreams, not dinner. The belief is that these symbolic seeds encourage healthy crops by feeding the spirits of the land. Whether or not the spirits RSVP is unclear, but the respect shown here is undeniable. You're handed a kernel and invited to plant it. The soil is surprisingly warm. You press the seed in and cover it gently, whispering something vaguely poetic just to feel like you belong. You might have overdone it. The elder next to you raises an eyebrow and chuckles. Yeah, maybe not a full sonnet next time. The sky is thick with stars now. There's almost no light pollution here, which means constellations show up with a little extra swagger. You spot what might be Orion's belt or possibly a really well-organized cluster of random dots. Either way, the sky looks like it's showing off tonight. One of the women points upward and tells you about Cipactli, the mythical sea monster from Aztec creation stories. According to legend, the gods tore Cipactli's body apart to form the heavens and the earth. Her ribs became mountains, her skin became the sky, and her tears became rivers. She still cries, the woman says, nodding toward the lake. That's why it rains. You smile, goosebumps tiptoeing up your arms. You're not sure if it's the breeze, the story, or the growing suspicion that the coconut oil lamp beside you just winked. You help refill the oil for the lanterns now. A man shows you how to twist cotton thread into a wick and nestle it just right so it sips, not gulps, the oil. The flame catches with a tiny sigh and settles into a steady glow. The lamp floats gently onto the water, joining dozens of others like glowing lily pads. It's mesmerizing, watching a dark lake speckled with gold, each lamp carrying its own little wish into the night. Back at the tamale hearth, someone's fallen asleep with their head resting on a woven mat. A dog curls up beside them like a living foot warmer. No one disturbs them. Night farming isn't about speed, it's about rhythm. Some work, some rest, and all understand their part in the dance. As your eyelids get heavier, you realize that you've stopped checking the time. There's no schedule here, no alarm, no inbox. Just the creak of the chinampa beneath your feet, the smell of wood smoke and wet earth, and the hush of crops breathing under moonlight. You lie back on a reed mat laid between two ahujo trees, the lake lapping softly underneath like a heartbeat. Somewhere nearby, someone is still softly singing. The words are lost to distance, but the melody is clear, slow, looping, and full of sleep. The air is thick with the scent of warming earth and roasting chilies as you glide toward the chinampa's heart under a sky tinted purple by dusk. Torches of bundled reeds line the canals now, flickering like watchful eyes. You pause to listen, frogs croaking in soft choruses, the gentle slap of water against wooden boats, and, faintly, the hum of cicadas refusing bedtime. These nocturnal guardians are nature's pest control, chomping mosquito larvae before they hatch, and their song doubles as a lullaby for the gardens. Historians still argue whether the Aztecs deliberately encouraged cicadas near chinampas or simply accepted them as part of the aquatic ecosystem. Either way, their nightly symphony keeps away unwelcome guests, both insect and human. You drift alongside a narrow plot where moonlit beans climb stalks like tightrope walkers seeking the next high point. A farmer kneels beside the canal's edge, whispering to each vine while trimming wayward shoots, a fringe practice said to teach plants order. The trimmed leaves are tossed into baskets to become compost, then carried downstream to nourish new plots. It's an early form of organic recycling that would make today's compost enthusiasts weep with envy. Further on, you find a shallow alcove where night-blooming flowers unfurl their petals to attract owls and bats, silent pollinators on the Aztec payroll. Mariposa lilies and jasmine vines weave together, and their fragrance drifts over the water like a secret. The Aztecs weren't just farming food. They were crafting nocturnal gardens designed to feed both stomachs and spirits. At the center of this nighttime marvel stands a simple wooden platform with a small brazier. Inside, smoldering copal incense curls upward, smoke twisting into the air as an offering to the moon goddess, Coilzaqui. Farmers gather here to share stories of frantic herons, rain thief spirits, and harvest hopes, each tale ending with a flick of a match, relighting the incense so its scent can guide dreams toward fertile visions. This communal moment binds the Chinampa community as tightly as the reeds bind their floating plots. And as the stars wheel overhead, you drift off, cradled by the gentle hum of insects, the soft rustle of leaves, and the assurance that even in darkness, these floating gardens breathe, pulse, and promise a new dawn. You wake before the sun does, just barely. The sky is the color of smoked fish, and your breath clouds the cool air as you rise from the canoe's damp bench. Somewhere, a heron screeches like it lost its wallet. You stretch, and everything creaks, your joints, the boat, even the garden plots seem to groan a bit under the weight of dew. Welcome to Aztec morning maintenance. While most of the empire is still tangled in their woven reed mats dreaming of feathered serpents and maize gods, the Chinamperos, those tireless floating farmers, are already ankle-deep in their day. You trudge onto the nearest Chinampa and immediately sink half an inch into the soft, rich soil. It squelches approvingly. The night has done its job. Now it's your turn. You start with the weeding, fingers cold and a little numb as they pinch out intruders from among the rows of amaranth. Aztec farmers were champions of crop rotation, and today's patch used to be beans 3 moons ago. You can practically feel the nitrogen humming in the earth, a legacy left by legumes doing their quiet underground magic. Nearby, a fellow farmer talks to her corn stalks, not just idle chatter, but formal greeting. Aztec agricultural practice included morning recitations to crops, especially maize, believed to possess divine consciousness. Some whispered blessings, others sang them elaborate praise songs, promising respect and gratitude in exchange for a strong harvest. Whether the corn actually grew taller from compliments is still up for debate. Historians still argue whether these rituals were more spiritual or psychological gardening tools, but you have to admit, it's a charming way to start the day. Suddenly, a small canoe appears along the canal, its pilot wielding a long, narrow pole and a stack of cactus pads. He's not delivering tacos. These pads, nopal, are destined for pest control. Sliced open and laid out around the plots, they serve as sticky traps for crawling insects. An ancient trick, sure, but surprisingly effective. You help set a few, the pads oozing slightly as they press into the dirt like vegetal landmines. Bonus: they're biodegradable. Eat the evidence if you must. A shout echoes from a farther plot. Someone found a rabbit nest in their lettuce again. The Chinampas may look serene, but they're also home to curious critters. Coyotes, skunks, and even the occasional wayward jaguar once made cameos here, prompting emergency garden redesigns. Aztecs, ever practical, sometimes incorporated small wooden fences, not to keep the animals out exactly, but to mildly suggest they go bother someone else's cucumbers. The sun finally breaches the eastern horizon, painting the sky with molten gold. You squint at the light reflecting off the water, momentarily blinded and utterly dazzled. This is peak productivity hour. Before the heat sets in, You and the others will transplant seedlings from one chinampa to another, dredge the surrounding canals for nutrient-rich mud to reinforce beds, and check that the reeds binding each floating island remain tight. One rogue loosened raft, and you'll be chasing your carrots halfway across the lake. By mid-morning, sweat beads on your brow, the sun high now, unapologetic. You stop for a break, biting into a sweet, juicy zokanakli, Aztec prickly pear fruit, chilled overnight by the cool canal air. The seeds crunch like tiny secrets between your teeth. Around you, the day swells with dragonflies, laughter, and the busy musical rhythm of people tending earth that floats. Your feet are tired, your hands stained green, and your heart strangely light. These mornings may start in stillness, but they swell into symphonies of work, community, and whispers to the sky. By now, the sun hangs higher, tipping toward its relentless midday blaze. But you, clever Chinampero that you are, have one more trick tucked under your woven belt: shade. Not the emotional kind, though you could sling that too if needed. No, this is practical shade. And in this floating garden civilization, it's engineered as elegantly as the plots themselves. You haul a folded mat of palm fronds from your canoe and stretch it between two willow stakes embedded at the edge of your chinampa. Voila! Portable canopy. The Aztecs had a knack for soft infrastructure. Nothing too permanent, everything adaptable. A farming life among floating islands doesn't lend itself to concrete or stubbornness. So you work beneath this makeshift awning, protected from the brutal gleam above, like a desert lizard that knows better than to sunbathe. While you prune the sprawling vines of your squash plants, a neighbor floats by and nods. She's on her way to one of the fertilizer drop-off points, a polite euphemism for latrine waste processing. That's right. One of the secret ingredients to Aztec farming success? Human manure, known as night soil. Collected from household latrines and redistributed as fertilizer, this practice was, frankly, both ecologically brilliant and a little gross. Historians still argue whether the method was truly widespread or just reserved for elite urban farms. But either way, you can't deny the yield results were chef's kiss. The good news: the smell isn't as apocalyptic as you'd expect. A mix of charcoal, dried herbs, and volcanic ash was often added to neutralize odor and boost soil minerals. It's still not Chanel No. 5, but you'd survive it. Probably. Now, with the major morning work done, your focus turns to the chinampa's structural maintenance. Every few weeks, the islands need a tune-up. You kneel at the water's edge and dip your hand in. Cool, silty water laps at your fingers as you grab handfuls of lake-bottom mud and smear it over the edge of your plot, reinforcing the banks. It's like icing a very muddy cake. A cake that could float away with your radishes if you're not careful. Overhead, a few lazy clouds gather. If rain comes, you'll have to secure everything. Sometimes the storms sneak up like gossip in a market. You glance toward the edge of the lake where a faint shimmer of mist hints at a distant squall. Time to fasten the reed mats tighter and check the bamboo stakes anchoring your island. Losing a chinampa during a storm? Humiliating. Like misplacing a sofa mid-lunch. As you secure a stake, a bird lands nearby and stares at you like it's your supervisor. It's a chachalaca, a sort of prehistoric-looking chicken with the voice of a kazoo. You nod politely. Even the birds seem to hold you accountable out here. Later, while patching a corner of your island that started to droop a little like tired bread dough, you notice something odd: a small figurine nestled among the roots. A clay doll, no taller than your thumb, with a faintly smirking expression. You brush off the mud and raise an eyebrow. Offerings like this were often placed in the foundations of chinampas, meant to bless the harvest, protect the farmer, or maybe just prank the next generation. Historians still debate whether these tokens were religious in nature or just deeply cultural inside jokes. You set it on a flat stone and decide not to toss it. You've grown superstitious since that time your carrots mysteriously vanished overnight. Ghost of a hungry god? Maybe. More likely a clever otter. But you're not taking chances. By now, the lake is alive with chatter. Other farmers compare tomato yields, swap seed pouches, or argue over which plot has the best ducks. A group of boys tries to race canoes between the garden rows, failing spectacularly and soaking themselves. One nearly falls into a cluster of wild chilies and regrets all his choices instantly. Amid the chaos, you settle into a quieter rhythm, carefully sorting through stored seed pods for the next planting cycle. These are your genetic heirlooms: beans, maize, squash, even flowers. Bright yellow sempasicil, the marigold of the dead, grows on a corner plot. It's not a food crop, but a spiritual one, placed there in memory. Of what or who, you're not sure. But it brings color, and you like how the bees congregate around it like tiny, buzzing monks. Eventually, you lie back under your palm awning, eyes half closed, listening to the hum of the chinampas. This is your afternoon lull. The floating garden sways just slightly beneath you, like a cradle rocked by the lake herself. If there's a better way to farm, you haven't heard of it. The afternoon haze settles over the lake like a warm quilt. You feel it in your joints, in the sluggish glide of your paddle as you cross to another chinampa, a narrow strip owned by your cousin who swears his corn has more personality than yours. You're not convinced, but you humor him. Family pride and all that. As your canoe cuts through the mirror-still water, dragonflies skim the surface like dancers with somewhere to be. It's quiet enough to hear the occasional plop of a fish leaping, or the distant chant of a market vendor still trying to sell the last of his wilted greens before night falls. You pass beneath the shadow of a tall ahujo tree, those signature willows that line the chinampas, their roots woven deep into the structure like stitches in a floating tapestry. These trees aren't just scenic. They're essential. The roots stabilize the islands, drinking up excess moisture and binding the soil together with botanical determination. One could say they're the rebar of the ancient agricultural world, if rebar were leafy and whispered in the wind. You reach up to pluck a dangling branch, not for any reason in particular, just because it's there, and you've always liked the texture of those long, narrow leaves between your fingers. As you arrive at your cousin's plot, he's perched like a heron at the far edge, squinting down at his maize plants. You both exchange grunts of greeting, Aztec for, "I see you, I acknowledge your existence, let's skip the pleasantries." He's spotted leaf rot on a few stalks and wants your opinion. You crouch beside him, inspecting the darkened curls and brittle tips. It's not good, but it's not fatal either. You advise an ashwater rinse and perhaps a whispered apology to Tlaloc, god of rain, just in case. Which reminds you, rituals. They're everywhere, stitched into the daily motions of farming life like tiny invisible knots. You don't begin planting without a whispered chant. You don't pull up your first radish without thanking the earth. Historians still argue whether these rites were more for the god's benefit or for the psychological comfort of the farmer. Probably both. You don't question them. You don't need a dissertation to believe in something that works. Your cousin snorts when you suggest singing to the corn. But later, you catch him humming as he scatters ash along the rows. Respect is a funny thing. Back in your own canoe, you steer toward the central compost mound, a floating platform of mulch, trimmings, and decomposed lake vegetation. The Aztecs were meticulous composters. Waste wasn't waste here, it was future fertility. You add a bundle of dead vine to the heap, pressing it down with a flat paddle. The steam rising from the pile smells a little like damp jungle, a little like yesterday's breakfast. You pause here, letting the stillness creep into your bones. Far out across the lake, you can just make out the temple tops of Tenochtitlan, glinting in the last rays of sun. The city feels almost unreal from this distance, too symmetrical, too perfect. Out here, things are messier, softer. You prefer the company of vines and frogs to stone and ceremony. And frogs, oh yes, are beginning their nightly chorus. A ripple of sound, croaky and rhythmic, swelling like a choir of tiny, disgruntled monks. You smile. You remember being told as a child that frogs were the lake's way of speaking, complaining when the weather turned too dry or singing when Tlaloc was pleased. Back on your chinampa, the sun begins its golden dive. Shadows stretch long across the water, and the lake transforms into a glassy sheet of obsidian. You light a small torch, not for heat, but for atmosphere. The flicker reflects off the wet leaves of your pepper plants, turning them briefly to gold. This is when the garden changes character. It's no longer a workplace. It becomes something quieter, reverent. Even the insects shift tones, buzzing lower, slower, as if conscious of the hush settling over the islands. You tuck yourself beside a pile of maize husks and close your eyes for a moment. Inhale. The air smells like crushed greenery, lake mud, and smoke. You listen to the distant lull of water lapping at reed walls, to the chirp and thunk of animals bedding down, to the occasional splash of a late paddler trying not to tip their cargo of squash. Evening is coming. Not quickly. Not with drama. It's just drifting in, one breath at a time. Tomorrow, the floating gardens will be reborn. Seeds will sprout. Mud will shift. You'll chase off birds again and hope your cucumbers don't get overly ambitious. But for now, there's nothing left to do but rest your spine against a woven mat, let the warm torchlight flicker across your eyelids, and drift. Your canoe bobs softly in the water like it agrees. The torchlight dances across the water in lazy ripples as you settle deeper into your chinampa, feet tucked under your legs and arms folded loosely across your chest. You could head back to shore, to your little reed hut, but something about the night air and the hush of the lake tells you to linger. You're not alone in this practice. Plenty of farmers sleep right on their chinampas, curled on mats, swaddled in coarse blankets, lulled by frogs and the occasional hoot of a night bird. You glance over to a neighboring platform where a solitary flame flickers. Someone else has made camp there, probably another chinampero, maybe that older guy who claims his beans grow straighter because he only plants them during lunar eclipses. You've never checked the math on that. As you stretch out on the woven mat, the scent of the lake mud thickens with the cooling air. The stillness becomes a kind of music, broken only by the soft lapping of water against the island's edge and the distant rhythmic splash of an oar. Somebody still out there, possibly drunk, possibly lost, possibly just stubborn. You wouldn't blame them. There's something addictive about being adrift like this, surrounded by rows of shadowed crops that feel like sleepy sentinels. You shift slightly and feel a lump under your mat. Reaching beneath, you pull out a small, sun-dried squash someone forgot, or maybe offered to the earth. Hard to say. Aztecs believed in leaving small gifts for the spirits of the land. Historians still argue whether this was symbolic or rooted in fear, but regardless, it meant you didn't eat the pretty squash you found under your mat at night. You gently roll it aside like a clumsy offering to the chinampa gods and whisper a half-hearted thanks, just in case. Above you, the stars begin to pierce through the thin cloud cover. You spot a familiar pattern, the three hearthstones of Mesoamerica, Orion's belt, but Aztec style. It's comforting, knowing the same constellations watched your ancestors as they dug canals and whispered to the maize. The stars don't change much, even when empires fall. And then, something odd happens. A sudden rustling in the water hyacinths near your boat. Not alarming. Just curious. You sit up slightly and squint through the dark, watching as a small, flat boat, much smaller than yours, drifts past. It's unmanned. A candle flickers at the bow. A tiny figurine, possibly clay, possibly something stranger, stands mid-deck like a toy soldier. One of those again. These candle boats are part of a fringe tradition, whispered about more than actually practiced. Some say they're offerings sent out to guide the souls of drowned farmers. Others claim they're love spells, tiny floaters packed with flower petals and crushed herbs, drifting toward the object of someone's affection. You once heard someone suggest it's just kids being dramatic. Either way, they're beautiful. You watch it pass without interfering. You're not about to tamper with lake magic, no matter how silly it looks. You lie back again, arms folded behind your head. The sky stretches wide above, pinpricked and infinite, and the floating gardens hum below you, alive even in sleep. It's easy to forget that you're standing, lying, on engineering. These gardens weren't nature's gift. They were manufactured from patience, mud, sweat, and more mud. The process was slow, methodical. First, the reed frame. Then layers of lake-bottom silt. Then the roots of trees like the trusty ahujo to anchor it all. Each chinampa was a patch of resilience, living proof that stubborn farmers could trick a lake into growing carrots. And these weren't your basic backyard vegetable plots. Some were several hundred feet long and shockingly productive, yielding up to 7 harvests a year. You squint into the darkness, thinking about all the other chinampas stretching out like jigsaw pieces across the lake. A floating empire of vegetables. Lettuce kingdoms. Corn dukedoms. Tomato insurgencies. Somewhere, probably, a toad croaks in agreement. You close your eyes, just for a second, and hear a rustle in the maize to your right. For a fleeting half-awake moment, your mind leaps to spirits, ghost farmers, vengeful squash gods, that one chinampa prankster kid who insists on sneaking cucumbers into your canoe. But it's just a possum. You hear it shuffle away, unimpressed by your presence. Eventually, the night deepens. The last paddle splash fades. The frogs adopt a slower rhythm. Somewhere in the far-off city, a drumbeat pulses, a ritual perhaps, or some ceremonial echo that drifts across the water like a heartbeat. You lie very still now, half awake, half asleep. The chinampa cradles you like a hammock woven from roots and silt. Your breath syncs with the rhythm of the lake. Even your thoughts feel quieter, like they're tiptoeing. You'll wake with the sun. You'll stretch, crack your back, and check on the chilies. You'll paddle over to your cousins again and compare bean sprout shapes like their competitive siblings. But not yet. Not while the candle boats drift and the frogs sing lullabies and the stars listen in. For now, you're just part of the garden. When the sun finally peeks over the rim of Lake Xochimilco, you're already stirring. The fog hovers low and milky, like the lake has exhaled a long sigh overnight. Your limbs ache a bit, sleeping on woven mats does that, but your brain is still wrapped in that slow, dreamlike fog of morning. It's quiet, still, and your ears do that thing where silence sounds like soft ringing. You stretch like a cat and sit up, brushing a bit of leaf debris from your tunic. The night offered you good rest, minus the possum, the floating loveboat, and possibly the squash spirit. But the day is calling now, and that means movement. You head for the edge of your chinampa and lean over, splashing cool lake water onto your face. No soap needed. Just the splash and chill of the lake is enough to jolt you into the present moment. Your reflection stares back, sleep-tousled, grainy-eyed, a bit like a waterlogged scarecrow. Beautiful. Exactly the aesthetic of someone who lives half-submerged in floating farmland. Nearby, other chinamperos begin to stir. You hear a sneeze, a splash, a wooden or knocking against a dock. The lake's awakening like a sleepy beast, and you're part of its routine. Your task this morning is a simple one: reinforce the edges of your plot. The roots and reeds along one side are beginning to sag, normal wear and tear, but still something you don't want to ignore. You pull a small paddle boat alongside the platform, hop in, and start loading fresh mud dredged from the canal bottom into woven reed baskets. It's not glamorous, but it's necessary. The canals aren't just watery roads. They're living veins. The mud is rich with nutrients, and when packed around the chinampa's edges, it feeds the soil like a buffet for your plants. And, yes, it smells kind of like swampy farts. That's the price of high-yield produce. You recall a favorite chinampa saying, "The stinkier the mud, the sweeter the tomato." No one knows if it's true. Historians still argue whether this folk wisdom had any agronomic validity or was just invented by someone with poor hygiene and a great harvest. Either way, you repeat it with a grin as you haul another basket. While scooping silt, your hand brushes something unexpected, metal, smooth and curved. You lift it carefully. It's an obsidian blade, old and dull, but unmistakably ceremonial. Not a farming tool, but something more sacred. You hold it up to the light. Its surface glints, and for a moment, you imagine a priest using it to trim sacred plants or maybe... Well, let's not go there. Sleepy history, not spooky history. This isn't uncommon. The lake bed is full of lost objects. Some call them relics, others litter. You once found a small carved turtle, and your cousin swears he unearthed a golden bead, though he also once claimed to grow jalapenos the size of your foot, so grain of salt. By mid-morning, your edges are reinforced, and your arms ache with that good, earned soreness. You step back onto your chinampa and look around. Everything seems in order. The amaranth looks perky. The beans are clingy. Even the chili plants, which are notoriously fussy, seem content. You walk the rows slowly, fingers brushing leaf tips like you're checking pulses. And now it's time for your secret weapon. You duck behind a screen of reeds and pull out an old clay pot sealed with a woven lid. Inside, fermented maize sludge. Not for eating. No, this is your compost brew, equal parts food scrap, crushed leaves, and a sprinkle of fish bits. It smells, frankly, like the inside of a raccoon's dreams. But pour a little at the base of your squash and bam, growth spurt. You drizzle just a touch on each plant, whispering your grandmother's planting rhyme under your breath. It doesn't rhyme anymore in modern Nahuatl, and you're pretty sure you're mispronouncing a few syllables, but you do it anyway. Rituals matter. Or at least, they feel like they do. That's half the battle. There's an old story you heard once, told by the canoe repair lady with the missing toe. She said a farmer who skipped his compost ritual ended up with a chinampa full of nothing but weeds shaped like angry faces. You laughed. But you still say the rhyme. The sun is climbing now, heat beginning to rise off the water in shimmery waves. You wipe your brow and sit for a moment, back resting against the trunk of your ahujote tree. Its roots anchor the chinampa, reaching deep into the mud like an old man clinging to the past. You swear sometimes it creaks, like it's trying to speak. Above, a heron lands, long-legged and regal, then immediately poops in your canal. Charming. You make a mental note to skim that out later. A canoe glides past, paddled by a trader carrying bundles of herbs and small clay effigies. He nods at you and offers a sleepy clazocamity as he passes. You nod back. Words feel optional in this hour. Your stomach growls. Breakfast will be whatever your cousin didn't drop in the lake, probably maize cakes and a few spicy greens rolled in maguey leaves. Not exciting, but filling. Plus, it's all grown here, from the chinampa to your hands. The full circle moment is strangely poetic. As the day opens, your chinampa breathes with you. The wind picks up a bit, rustling the leaves. You inhale the scent of wet soil, lake water, and something else, maybe a distant tamale stand. Your muscles relax into the rhythm again. You remember a time when you dreamed of leaving this behind, heading to the city, maybe becoming a stoneworker or a feather artist, something flashy. But then the lake whispered to you, slow and steady. Stay. It didn't shout. It just hummed. And you listened. The air is thicker now, warmed by the sun, stirred by wings and paddles, sweetened by drifting scents of maize and crushed flowers. You rest your forehead against your palm, elbows on knees, and stare out over the canal like a philosopher who's just discovered that geese poop more than they honk. There's still more to do, of course. Chinamperos never really finish, they just pause. Today's big task. Pollination tricks. Because as clever as your floating garden system is, not all the bees got the memo. Sometimes, it takes a little nudge to get nature to cooperate, especially with crops like chayote and squash, whose flowers are needy little divas that won't bloom without a bit of encouragement. You grab your feather brush, yes, it's literally a bunch of duck feathers tied to a twig, and make your way toward the squash row. Your job is simple. Act like a bee. Dab, swish, repeat. It's oddly meditative, this soft, rhythmic impersonation of a humming insect. Historians still argue whether the Aztecs practiced artificial pollination widely or if you're just ahead of your time. Either way, you think your plants like it. They look perkier after a good feathering. And no one else in your extended family has squashed this symmetrical. A dragonfly lands on your brush mid-dab. You pause. It's electric blue and big enough to be registered as an aircraft. It eyes you, then zooms off, probably to report back to the Mosquito Council. Next up is pest control. You don't use any fancy powders or sprays, mostly because they haven't been invented yet. Instead, you rely on the old ways, companion planting, clever traps, and your secret weapon, crushed chili water. You mix it this morning, boiling a handful of dried chilies with water until it smells like a punch to the face. Once cooled, it's sprayed onto leaves to keep bugs away. Apparently, insects hate spicy food. Unlike you, who once ate 5 tamales soaked in chili broth on a dare and couldn't taste anything for 3 days. You step lightly between rows, spritzing the chili brew and humming to yourself. It's not a song so much as a tune made of habit, notes that your hands have memorized better than your tongue. Around you, the plants rustle. You'd swear they're listening. The strangest part of this whole chinampa life is how alive it feels. The ground isn't ground. It's layered with past harvests, ancient silt, and whispered offerings. The air isn't just air, it carries the sound of paddles slapping, traders bartering, a heron laughing, probably at you, and sometimes, a flute drifting from a distant canoe. Lunch approaches quietly. You snack on a handful of roasted amaranth seeds and a few wrinkled berries plucked from a low bush at the edge of the plot. It's not much, but you're not hungry. You're garden hungry. It's a real thing. The kind of appetite that only arrives after a morning surrounded by things that grow because you willed them to. You think of the elders now, the ones who taught you the signs. When the ahujote leaves curl just so, rain is coming. When the frogs get extra loud after dusk, plant more maize. And if the chili plants bloom in odd numbers, offer something to the lake spirits. just in case. There's one old story that tickles you every time. A Chinampero who forgot to ask permission from the lake before dredging soil was said to be haunted, not by ghosts, but by a persistent wind that kept flipping over his canoe. No matter the weather. Always capsized. Historians still debate whether this tale was metaphorical or just a very specific vendetta from the breeze. You look up at the sky, where the clouds have gathered like sheep with attitude. Maybe rain later. Or just shade. Either way, it's a welcome reprieve. You take a moment to resecure your irrigation channels. It's a simple system of trenches and gate leafs, paddle-shaped boards wedged into place to direct the lake's flow. When the water is high, you loosen them. When low, you plug them tight. It's basically Chinampa plumbing. And like all plumbing, it's equal parts engineering and random panic. One time, you left a gate open overnight and woke to a minor flood. Your corn sulked for a week. The tomato vines still haven't forgiven you. As you reposition the final board, you spot something bobbing in the water nearby, an old, carved reed doll. Small, delicate, clearly handmade. Likely dropped during a ceremony. Offerings like these were common here. Fertility charms, blessing tokens, even tiny maize replicas meant to convince the gods to, please, just this once, don't ruin the harvest. You fish it out gently and set it aside near the base of the tree. You don't believe in everything. But some things, better not to tempt. The breeze picks up, rustling the squash leaves into whispers. It sounds almost like laughter. Or maybe that's just your brain fraying at the edges after too much chilly water. You take a long, slow breath. The lake smells like earth and time. And then, you hear it. That slow, rhythmic drumming from a distance. Someone, somewhere, is preparing for a festival. Maybe for Xilanen, the young maize goddess, or for Tlaloc, who handles rain and tantrums. You hum along, not to the rhythm but to the feeling. That sleepy, floaty hum of a life rooted in motion, tethered by mud and magic and a feather brush used to flirt with squash blossoms. You stretch your arms overhead, your back letting out a series of delicate pops that sound remarkably like a xylophone built from overworked vertebrae. The sky softening into that pre-dusk haze where everything seems dipped in golden water, and your Chinampa glows like a scene out of a dream, or an oddly specific greeting card. You've earned a break. Kind of. Which in Aztec Chinampa terms means you're switching from active gardening to passive tinkering. So, naturally, you crouch down next to the edge of your plot to fix the reed border that's slowly sagging into the canal like a tired tortilla. The reeds are your natural fencing system, laced together with twine and stubbornness. They're meant to hold the soil in place and fend off nosy turtles. Yes, turtles. Adorable, yes, but notorious for nibbling young roots. You once watched one bulldoze through a patch of cilantro like a sleepy little tank. While you weave, your mind wanders, back to the builders of this marvel. Tenochtitlan itself, rising out of the lake on a mesh of these floating islands, was basically an engineering flex of mythic proportions. Imagine telling someone today, I built my city in a swamp using mud and branches, and oh, by the way, it's also the center of an empire. Historians still argue whether Chinampas were invented as a survival tactic or a spiritual revelation, but the results speak for themselves. Year-round farming, astonishing yields, and an eerily harmonious balance between humans and their soggy surroundings. You adjust another reed and glance at the water. A school of tiny fish darts past, shimmering like mobile sequins. Just beyond, a canoe glides by, the paddler nodding at you without a word. That's the Chinampa wave, silent, respectful, maybe a little suspicious, like, I see your corn's taller than mine this year, but I'm not mad about it. Yet. You chuckle quietly and return to your task. The reeds go taut, one by one, as you tie off each knot. Your fingers know the pattern. Over, under, twist, tuck. It's not fancy, but it's tradition, and tradition here is stronger than the lake itself. Off to your left, the ahujote trees lining the edge sway, their spindly roots anchoring your plot in place. They do more than look dramatic. They prevent erosion and act like nature's hairpins, keeping your Chinampa from drifting into your neighbor's territory during storms. Which, could lead to some deeply passive-aggressive shoveling. You take a moment to admire your handiwork. The reed wall now stands firm, a crisp little barrier between your domain and the hungry canal. There's something deeply satisfying about fixing things that can't talk back. Unlike your uncle, who once accused your lettuce of stealing nutrients from his beans. The light shifts again, and suddenly your garden's bathed in amber. Time to check the shade patterns. Yes, really. Aztec chinamperos didn't just grow plants, they choreographed them. Tall maize to the north, shade-loving herbs to the south, sprawling squash to the edges where they can flirt with the water. You walk the perimeter slowly, noting which leaves are curling, which flowers are closing for the night. Some plants, like the social flower, actually respond to the moonlight, opening slightly under certain lunar phases. Historians still argue whether this was tracked deliberately or simply admired as a happy accident. There's a certain romance to gardening in the moon's direction. You don't write it down, of course. You just remember it, like your grandmother's advice about planting beans during waxing crescents and never trusting a cloudy eclipse. Speaking of the moon, it's just peeking over the horizon now, a soft round glow rising like a scoop of rice pudding. You squint and grin. Tonight's going to be bright, a good omen. Or a good excuse to stay up and stargaze from the canoe like a low-budget philosopher. Before the light fades fully, you tuck a few of your tools under the bark shelter at the back of the chinampa. It's a humble lean-to, more suggestion than structure, but it keeps your feather brushes dry and your seed bundles safe from the curious beaks of ducks who absolutely do not respect personal boundaries. You pause beside the shelter, reach up, and gently tug on the cord that hangs above the doorway. A handful of dried marigolds drop down in a perfumed flutter, last season's charm. You smile and tuck one behind your ear. Because why not? Even chinampa gardeners deserve a little flair. As the darkness sets in, something changes in the air. The water hushes. The insects switch songs. And the city, far beyond the canals, starts to pulse with drums and flutes and laughter. It's festival time somewhere, and you're close enough to catch the echoes but far enough to keep your peace. You lie back on the warm reed mat, hands behind your head, staring up at the sky as it blooms with stars. Some constellations have names, others have stories, and at least one is called that cluster that looks like a duck sneezing. You close your eyes and listen. To the frogs chirping. To the crickets harmonizing. To the wind threading itself through the reeds. And you think, maybe, just maybe, you've chosen the right kind of life. Mud, bugs, turtle drama and all. The air turns cool, the kind of cool that slides gently across your skin like wet silk, not the icy slap you'd get from the mountaintops or the harsh dry breeze that screams across deserts. This is lake air, soft, humid, mildly fishy if you pay attention, but comfortingly so. You stretch out your legs on the mat and gaze upward, where stars blink lazily in a sky so clear it feels carved from obsidian. You've always known these constellations by different names than the ones those conquistadors scribbled in their charts. Here, a group of stars might mark the path of the maize god. Another might be the jaguar's leap. There's even one you swear looks like a molkajit, though you're told it's technically the jaguar's heart. Tomato, tomatal. Tonight's agenda isn't ambitious. You're just letting your muscles breathe, letting your thoughts wander like a duck through unattended watercress. And, because you're a responsible chinampero with nocturnal curiosity, you're also preparing for your midnight harvest. Yes. Harvesting. In the dead of night. A tradition as curious as it is calming. See, some crops were gathered under the moonlight for ritual reasons. Others, like certain herbs and mushrooms, were thought to be more potent when picked while the world slept. Historians still argue whether this was practical wisdom or just early Aztec marketing genius. Either way, you're not complaining. It's peaceful, the temperature is cooler, and the frogs make excellent background music. You sit up and light your coconut oil lamp. A squat little bowl with a cotton wick, a chunk of hardened oil, and a faint scent of toasted coconut. It flickers to life with a soft pop. The glow is warm, amber, and low, perfect for sneaking around like a gardening ninja. These lamps weren't just for aesthetics, though they're undeniably pretty. They were widely used across Mesoamerica for lighting homes, temples, even outdoor labor like this. Easy to make, easy to maintain, and surprisingly wind-resistant, probably thanks to the oil's viscosity. And if it spills? Worst-case scenario, you smell like dessert for an hour. Your first stop is the amaranth bed. These bushy, stubborn little plants have been growing quietly for weeks, their tiny flowers waving in the breeze like they've got something to say. Under the moonlight, the leaves glisten slightly, silver veins pulsing with life. You snip a few mature stalks and tuck them into your woven pouch, careful not to disturb the younger shoots. Next, you glide toward the chilies. Yes, chilies at midnight. Not exactly the sleepy fare you'd expect, but these varieties are mild, almost sweet, used more for aroma than heat. You hum a tune your grandfather used to whistle as you pick, a slow rhythm that matches the swing of your arms and the swish of the canal beside you. A splash nearby startles you, but when you look up, it's just a heron lifting off like some disapproving sky ghost. You nod respectfully. Birds are the real landlords around here. You just rent space and hope they don't evict you mid-planting season. Coconut lamp swaying gently in your hand, you make your way to the last patch, the herbs. Episode, Hoja Santa, wild cilantro. These you harvest slowly, carefully, whispering the old sayings as you go, not because you believe they'll hex your crop otherwise, but because it feels wrong not to. Speak softly to the mint, or it will turn bitter, your aunt always said. And never turn your back on the basil. It remembers. Do herbs hold grudges? Maybe. So does your cousin, and she's also leafy and unpredictable. As you pluck the final sprigs, you pause and look across the canal. A few other lamps blink like sleepy fireflies on distant chinampas, fellow night harvesters moving through the dark with quiet purpose. There's comfort in that. You're never really alone on the lake, even when it feels like it. You wrap your pouch tightly and nestle it beside the lamp, which is still burning steadily, casting long shadows of your silhouette onto the woven mat. The whole chinampa, once green and lively, now rests like a sleeping creature, still alive, but wrapped in stillness. You settle down again, leaning back on one elbow, the lamp beside you, its light growing softer by the minute. The moon's higher now, casting silver trails across the water, turning ripples into whispers. Your thoughts drift toward the people who came before, those who first staked reeds into the lakebed, who dared to believe that food could grow from floating mud. Those who balanced science and spirituality with such ease that even modern scholars still scratch their heads. Historians still argue whether the chinampas were an adaptation to climate, a sacred design, or simply genius improvisation. You think it's all three. Because why choose, when you can just grow tomatoes in a swamp and call it civilization? You lean your head back and sigh. There's nothing left to do tonight. The tools are stowed, the harvest tucked away, the lamp nearly spent. You close your eyes and listen, again, to the frogs, the breeze, the occasional nocturnal splash that could be anything from a fish to, let's be honest, an offended spirit returning from the farmer's market. A smile creeps across your face as the cool air settles into your bones. Your fingers curl against the mat. Your breath evens out. And just before sleep takes you, one final, absurd thought. You never did figure out how the turtles learned to open reed gates. A soft ripple stirs you, not fully awake, not entirely asleep. It's the sound of something brushing against the side of your chinampa, maybe a passing canoe, maybe a lazy swirl of wind. You don't open your eyes. There's no need. You know the sounds of the lake now. They are part of you, etched into the folds of your ears like the grooves of a worn drum. You let your breath slow. The night has deepened. The stars are sharper now, etched against the obsidian sky like fine silver threads. Somewhere in the distance, a reed flute warbles a melancholy tune. Someone still awake in Tenochtitlan, perhaps a night watchman or an insomniac priest with more poems than prayers left in him. Your lamp has finally gone out, leaving you cloaked in soft, velvety darkness. You lie still and listen. Even the frogs have quieted now, giving way to the deeper, wetter silences of midnight water. And yet, your mind wanders, softly, as if tiptoeing so as not to disturb the delicate quiet. You think back to the very first chinampa you helped build, how the mud clung to your knees, how the woven base kept sagging until you learned to layer the twigs just so. How proud you were when the first seed sprouted, a single stalk of maize that leaned sideways like it was too shy to stand upright. Back then, you didn't know what you were doing. Not really. But neither did the first chinamperos, surely. They just looked at the lake and thought, what if? What if food could float? What if islands could grow? That, what if, built an empire? You smile in the dark. You think of the calendar stones, the rituals, the market stalls piled high with chilies and avocados and squash. You remember the way your mother used to grind maize before sunrise, her metate rocking rhythmically, dust motes catching morning light like tiny sparks. You remember your uncle swearing that his neighbor's floating garden had drifted 5 feet closer overnight, a passive-aggressive migration that led to a turf war over tomato vines. You remember, too, the stories of maize gods who wept golden tears, of rain deities who lived in mountain caves, of canals that could whisper names on still nights. Historians still argue whether the Chinampa system was as efficient as claimed. Some say the yields were exaggerated, that the lake was less utopia and more mud bath. Others defend it with ferocity, pointing to the sheer longevity of the system, how it fed a city of hundreds of thousands, year after year, season after season. But here, lying under the stars, the debate seems less important than the truth you feel in your own hands, in your own soil. The Chinampa is alive. It breathes through its roots, it listens through its reeds, and it remembers more than any textbook ever will. A breeze passes over you, the cool kind that makes your shoulders shiver slightly before settling you deeper into the mat. Your body is heavy now, your muscles humming with the quiet ache of a day well spent. The lake has claimed you, not just in mud on your skin or pollen in your hair, but in the rhythm of your breath, the tilt of your thoughts. You can almost hear the corn growing. Almost. Your fingers twitch once, reflexively reaching for a phantom reed to tie or a sprout to straighten. But no, your work is done. The garden sleeps, and so will you. And in the morning, when the mist hovers low over the canals, when the city reawakens with its market calls and paddle songs, you'll rise and tend to it all again. Not because you must, but because you can't imagine not doing so. For now, though, let it rest. Let the lake hold you. Let the stars watch. Let the night carry you just a little farther, into dreams made of maize fields and moonlight. Now, let's wind it all down. The breeze hushes, and the last ripples of water flatten into a mirror of the stars above. Your limbs, so busy all day, are still now. Even your thoughts feel like they've been set down gently, like tools beside the garden path. There is no rush, no noise, no one calling for your attention. The night holds everything, your garden, your breath, your story, with the tender strength of water wrapped around stone. The air, warm but touched with the cool kiss of midnight, moves across your skin like a lullaby. The lake has fallen into complete quiet, interrupted only by the occasional drip, drip, drip of dew collecting on the thatch above your shelter. You feel it now, the soft, unmistakable pull of sleep. Each breath you take becomes a little slower, a little deeper. The stars blink slowly. Your heartbeat echoes the pace of the world. The Chinampa rocks almost imperceptibly beneath you, like a cradle. And as your mind begins to drift, as your body lets go, remember, this garden will still be here when you wake. Growing, listening, dreaming, just like you.